the Landscape of Memory is a 7-piece installation. The artists are video artists, so this is something very new for the McMullen Museum. We haven't had video artists before displayed. All of those artists come from the Middle East. And the theme is memory, identity, home, homeland, displacement, loss, and even personal grief. So the artists all come from the Middle East, and probably that's not surprising because they've all personally gone through some pretty catastrophic experiences that have changed their lives. And you know, most of them experienced war or civil war. Some of them lived through dictatorships, and those dictatorships were pretty brutal. Most of them at one point in their life had to flee. So they all, you know, bring together this idea of when you were born and rooted in a particular place, what happens when you are forced to migrate, when your displacement is not something that you choose to immigrate, but rather you're simply forced out. And what does that feel like? And what about in the next place where you live? Do you feel alienated or estranged, or do you miss your home and your family and the loved ones that you were forced to leave behind? So this is not unusual, an unusual thing in the Middle East, because right now we have 16 million refugees, and that's before the Turkey and Syria earthquake. So we're going to add an awful lot to that. So these are artists who have experienced those things, personal experience with those things, and in their videos they're asking the question, and I think in a very personal way, but also a very universal human way. How would we all, any of us, respond to these circumstances? And that's something that should make us think very deeply. Their idea is that while these catastrophes happen, you have to preserve your resilience, you know, but also your humanity, and your hospitality, and your hope. And that's what they've done. Replay is a video by the artist Lamia Georgia, and she's from Beirut, Lebanon. She also left Lebanon at the time of the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted from 1975 until 1990. So when she was a little girl, she came across a book that was published in 1978, so that's only 3 years after the war began, and she was paging through it. It was a photography book, and she was paging through it, and she found what she felt as a little kid were two very disturbing pictures. One was of a woman running with no shoes on, looked like in the middle of the road, and she had a terrified look on her face, and she was just running. And there was nobody else in the picture, and it was confusing. You know, where was she running? Why was she running? Why is she so terrified? The next picture was of a man who had been shot by a sniper, and he was a young man, and he was falling down. So she thought about this for many years, and decided at one point that she would have two of her friends reenact that scene. So there's a woman in the video on the left, and she's running with no shoes on, and she just keeps running. And then there's a man on the right, and he has fallen down, and it looks like he's dying. And then in the middle, there's the ocean and the tidal waves that go on and on and on without stop, and you can't stop, you know, waves. So she calls this replay because the film is on a loop, and so the man continually dies. He falls and dies over and over again, and the woman continually runs, and no one ever helps her. So I think what she's saying is that several things. One is that historians will never be able to tell the stories of these two individual people, or all the individuals who lost their lives in war, and in the Lebanese Civil War in particular. So the war killed about 120,000 Lebanese people. It was sectarian violence, so that's almost the worst kind. In about 1 million people left Lebanon, which in a small country, that's quite a huge portion of the population. And 17,000 people were disappeared. One of those people was Lamia Georges' uncle, and they never found him. So of course this is going to haunt her, and of course, because they didn't know what happened to her uncle, it's going through her mind, this replay going through her mind, but what kind of life would he have had if the Civil War didn't interrupt it? What kind of life would all of these people have had? And so she talks about the rupture of time, which I think has something to do with the war rupturing people's lives. And then I think she also, is making a commentary on the political situation in Lebanon and the leaders in Lebanon who didn't resolve these sectarian differences. So when the war was over, she said, and she's got a really interesting quote, she says, "The war didn't end with a peace treaty or a true reconciliation, but rather with a sort of amnesia." And when that happens in war, you don't reconcile your differences, you don't figure out the root causes. And so I think replay also is a reference to the replaying of the sectarian violence that goes on to this very day, which has never been settled. Once Upon a Time, and it is by Sadiq Al-Frahi. He's from Iraq. So when he was a young artist, he thought he was kind of tricky by becoming an abstract artist. And because he lived under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, he figured that the regime wouldn't understand abstract art, and they didn't for a long time. So they didn't realize that he was critiquing the regime, or that he was a dissident, until they did. And when they did, then he had to flee. So he left the country quickly, and he got political asylum in the Netherlands, and that was in the early 90s. So he's not able to come back to Iraq for about 20 years. So when he finally is able to come back, now remember, he was a young man when he left, he's now a bit older, and he's missed his family, he's missed all of the things, the children that were being born, his brothers, his sisters, and certainly his mother and father. So when he comes back about 6 months prior to that time, his father has died. So he comes back, and he immediately goes to the house that he grew up in, and the video shows in the little rectangle box over on the left-hand side, scenes of obviously very happy childhood. There's food on the table, there's his father's traditional clothes, so a dishdasha, a kafia is the headdress, that's traditional. His father's prayer beads, and lots of kids, and they're crawling under the table and on top of the table. His mother, and there's a giant sort of looking down, sort of bent over almost in pain, you would say, and he's watching that box. And I think what he's trying to say is that he was forcibly displaced, he missed all of these things, and now he misses the memories of what life used to be and what life could have been had he been allowed to stay. You see these little figures, and they're hanging, they're all over, they're jumping all over, and sometimes they hang on the giant's face and so on. I call those lost ghosts, right, and shadows, and I think what he's saying are, these are his memories, but the memories are fleeting, they're very ephemeral. They're there and they're not there. It's almost like when you think, not you, because you're too young, but when older people think about their childhoods, they kind of grasp in a way, but it goes. You know, so you're never really able to like capture it like a butterfly and pin it down. And so I think there's this overwhelming sadness that he feels, that he's missed all of these things. But I also think that if you look at it in a positive way, if he hadn't had these wonderful memories, if he hadn't had a lovely childhood, then he wouldn't feel so sad that that his father was gone. So, and I just want to read my favorite part of it, because it's called The House My Father Built Once Upon a Time. And that once upon a time, I think, is very important to Al-Farhi. So he wrote something that with edited, he wrote it as kind of just a story, but I think it's more poetry. And so what we've done on one of the walls is to boil it down and really make the point that I think he was trying to make, but we turned it into a kind of poem, right? So I just want to read that, because to me it just is so touching. So he says, "This is then what is left of my father, a few objects, hundreds of memories, a grieving love which still fills my mother's eyes, and many unfinished tales. Here in this room, I used to sit next to him, sometimes on his lap or on my mother's, where I felt warm and happy, switching between the two. Here I used to play, run, dance, draw, and dream, sheltered by their presence and love. Oh Lord, where do memories come from, and where do they go? Where do they disappear, and in what cupboard are they set? Wherever we go, however we change or grow old, once upon a time will always be the words we carry within, long for, and cherish." This installation is by an artist from Lebanon. Her name is Marwa Arsenios, and she is making a commentary on what has happened in Lebanon over the past several decades. So the house that is suspended from the ceiling is called the Raja Saab house, but the locals called it the UFO. And it was built by a very famous architect from Lebanon by the name of Daher. It would sort of be the equivalent of Frank Lloyd Wright. And so he built this beautiful, very modern home, and a family had commissioned it and moved into it and lived there in the early 1950s. And they lived there until about the time of the Lebanese Civil War. And then the country began, obviously, to have all of this sectarian violence. And then even after the war, because there were about 1 million internal refugees, but also at the same time, you had people from Iraq. This was the era of Saddam Hussein, and then the Syrian Civil War, and so many people were displaced that in this beautiful area with this beautiful home along a beach that was nicknamed Acapulco on the Mediterranean, all of those people became sort of shoved out of the neighborhood. So what Arsenios is, I think, showing here is, for one thing, home movies during the 50s, 60s, and before the Civil War. And it shows people who are happy. It reminds me of going on vacation to the Cape. So their family vacations, they're happy, there's children running around, they're splashing in the Mediterranean. And in the background, you see the Raja Saab house. But notice that what she does is she puts the video down on the floor, practically, and very minimized. It's the smallest screen that we have. And she does this because what she's trying to say is that's the way it used to be, and it's no longer that way. It's minimized. It's small and out of the way, and also blurry. So it's kind of surrealistic. The videos show people having family time together, but you have the idea that this is something from very long ago, and the artist may be pessimistic optimistically thinking that we're never going to get the beach back, or the resorts, or the fun times that people had with their family. What happened was that by the 1990s, there were so many refugees that Lebanon was taking in. So Lebanon has about a quarter to a third of its population is refugees. And Lebanon is a very tiny country, so they have a lot of refugees. And about the UNHCR says Lebanon has about 157% of their fair share of refugees. So that's way more, right? It's 1.5 times the number that they can reasonably handle and accommodate. I think the United States has something like 20%. So that's a huge difference. And so they had nowhere to go. So where did they go? They went to, amongst other places, the beach once called Acapulco. And where did they live? Well, they became squatters. And so they moved into the Raja Sab. They moved into many areas along the beach. And the government of Lebanon considered them illegal. And so they refused to, or they probably didn't have the state capacity to give them sewage systems, education, schools, potable water, or any of the things that you would imagine you need to have to live a decent life. And so they moved into the home, and we have pictures of the home and how it's really been destroyed. And there was so much pollution because of the raw sewage in the Mediterranean that the tides have actually been changed. And so you really can't fish there, or if you ever caught anything, you couldn't eat what you caught. But yet these people are so marginalized and desperately poor that sometimes that's all they can do is try to find fish in the water so they have something to eat. So these people have been deserted. And what Arsenio's is saying is not that, oh, I wish all the rich people could come back and build more, designer crafted homes, but rather that there's been this shift so that everybody in Lebanon is poor. And I think she's also making a commentary about the artists, because most of the artists from Lebanon are in really desperate straits. So the way in which we chose the works, the 7 works that are in this exhibition, Landscape of Memory, is we went to the Barjeel Foundation, which is owned and run by Sultan Al-Qasimi from Sharjah. And we had already borrowed some of his works, more traditional works, last year in a different show that was very successful. And Sultan asked us, wouldn't we like to do something a little bit different and show video art? And we thought we'd take a look at it, and instead of pieces that had to be shipped, that this might be a good idea for a lot of different reasons. So he, and we knew that the artists were going to want to have each video in a separate room. It has to be that way because you can't have 3 or 4 or 7 videos playing all at the same time. It would be too distracting, you wouldn't be able to hear them. And what we learned was that video artists not only want to have their art in separate rooms, but those separate rooms had to be designed and painted and colored and placed under their very strict specifications. So this is what we did. This is Diana Larson's job here at the museum, and she and her team created 7 different rooms. So when we first agreed that we were going to show video art, Sultan sent us 70 pieces. So we knew that we didn't have space for 70 different rooms, and so we had to go through them and pick the ones that would fit. We decided that we could only fit 7. We also have another room that's a portal, so anybody who comes to the museum can also go into that 8th room and speak to people on the other side of the world. For example, in Iraq, Rwanda, South Africa, Gaza, many different places, and most of the conversations are about displacement and forced migration and refugees. So that's why, you know, all of this kind of hangs together. But we decided we could fit 7 with the 7 different rooms on 2 different floors. And we viewed all 70 of those videos. Some of them were pretty long, but we chose the 7 that we liked the best, just in terms of the content and the videography, the way in which the films were curated, and the vision of the artist. And after that, that became my job as curator to put them together, fit them together into a narrative, into a story that could be woven together to make sense, so that the exhibition as a whole had a theme. And I have to say we were very lucky at that, because we really didn't pick them for that reason. But it was easy, I think, for me to make a story out of them, because the artist had so many similar experiences.